Germany lay in ruins. The aftermath of World War I left the nation in a state of utter devastation. Cities were reduced to rubble, and the once thriving industrial heartland was now a wasteland. The war had not only destroyed the physical infrastructure, but also shattered the very soul of the German people. The Great War had shattered its economy, its spirit, and its pride. The German mark was virtually worthless, and hyperinflation made everyday goods unaffordable. Families struggled to put food on the table, and unemployment soared. The social fabric of the nation was torn apart, leaving a populace desperate and disillusioned. The Treaty of Versailles, a heavy burden upon the defeated nation, fueled resentment and instability. The harsh terms imposed on Germany included massive reparations, territorial losses, and severe military restrictions. This treaty was seen as a national humiliation, and it sowed the seeds of anger and bitterness among the German people. From this fertile ground of despair, a poisonous ideology took root. The political landscape was fragmented, with numerous parties vying for power. Amidst this chaos, extremist groups began to emerge, promising radical solutions to Germany's woes. Among them was the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party. It promised a return to glory, a scapegoat for their suffering, and a charismatic leader who embodied their anger. The Nazis offered simple answers to complex problems, blaming Jews, communists, and other minorities for Germany's misfortunes. Their propaganda was powerful, tapping into the deep-seated fears and prejudices of the populace. His name was Adolf Hitler. Hitler, a failed artist and decorated veteran, found his calling in the fledgling Nazi Party. He was a master orator, capable of captivating audiences with his fiery speeches. His message of national rejuvenation and racial purity resonated with many who felt betrayed by the current political system. He tapped into the deep well of national humiliation and economic despair. Hitler's rhetoric was filled with promises of a brighter future, a future where Germany would rise from the ashes and reclaim its rightful place in the world. He painted a vision of a strong, unified nation, free from the shackles of the Treaty of Versailles. His words, amplified by the burgeoning power of propaganda, resonated with a population desperate for change. The Nazis were adept at using modern communication tools to spread their message. Radio broadcasts, posters, and mass rallies were all employed to create a sense of unity and purpose among their followers. The Nazi Party, initially a fringe group, steadily gained traction. Their message of hope and renewal struck a chord with many Germans who were disillusioned with the Weimar Republic. The Nazis promised a return to greatness, a restoration of German pride, and a purging of those deemed responsible for their suffering, the Jews, communists, and other undesirables. Their message, amplified through rallies, marches, and the burgeoning medium of radio, spread like wildfire. The Nazis were masters of spectacle, using grandiose events to create a sense of momentum and inevitability. Their propaganda machine worked tirelessly to present Hitler as the savior of Germany, a man destined to lead the nation to glory. The SA, the party's paramilitary wing, terrorized opponents and intimidated voters. Known as the Brown Shirts, the SA played a crucial role in the Nazis' rise to power. They disrupted political meetings, attacked rival party members, and created an atmosphere of fear and violence. Their actions undermined the democratic process and paved the way for the Nazis' ascent. Germany's fragile democracy, already teetering on the brink, was easy prey for the Nazis' ruthless ambition. The Weimar Republic was plagued by political instability, economic crises, and social unrest. The Nazis exploited these weaknesses, presenting themselves as the only force capable of restoring order and stability. By 1933, Hitler, through a combination of intimidation, manipulation, and popular support, ascended to the chancellorship. Democracy crumbled. Once in power, Hitler moved quickly to consolidate his control, dismantling democratic institutions and silencing opposition. The Reichstag fire, a pivotal event, was used as a pretext to pass the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended civil liberties and allowed for the arrest of political adversaries. Germany, once a beacon of enlightenment, descended into the darkness of totalitarian rule. The Nazis established a regime based on fear, propaganda, and repression. The Gestapo, the secret police, monitored and eliminated dissent, while the SS, Hitler's elite guard, enforced the party's brutal policies. The Nuremberg laws institutionalized racial discrimination, stripping Jews of their rights and laying the groundwork for the Holocaust. The stage was set for a new world war, one that would be even more devastating than the last. Hitler's aggressive foreign policy aimed at territorial expansion and the unification of all German-speaking peoples. The remilitarization of the Rhineland, the annexation of Austria, and the invasion of Czechoslovakia were all steps towards this goal. The world watched in apprehension as Germany, under Nazi rule, prepared for a conflict that would engulf the globe and lead to unprecedented destruction and loss of life. With Hitler at the helm, Germany underwent a rapid and chilling transformation. The once democratic Weimar Republic was systematically dismantled, replaced by a totalitarian regime that sought to control every aspect of German life. Hitler's rise to power was marked by a combination of political savvy, ruthless ambition, and a terrifying vision for the future. He consolidated his power, ruthlessly eliminating any opposition. The infamous Night of the Long Knives saw the purge of the SA leadership and other political adversaries, solidifying Hitler's grip on the Nazi Party and the German state. The SS, under Heinrich Himmler, became the primary instrument of terror and control. The Nazi Party's grip on all aspects of life tightened. Propaganda, orchestrated by Joseph Goebbels, permeated every medium, from newspapers to radio broadcasts, ensuring that the Nazi ideology was inescapable. The Hitler Youth and League of German Girls indoctrinated the young while the Gestapo silenced dissent. Rearmament began in earnest, violating the Treaty of Versailles but fueling national pride and providing much-needed employment. The economy, which had been crippled by the Great Depression, began to recover as factories churned out weapons and military vehicles. The Luftwaffe was rebuilt, and the Wehrmacht expanded, preparing for the conflicts to come. Hitler's ambitions extended far beyond Germany's borders. He envisioned a vast empire, a Third Reich that would dominate Europe and secure resources for the German people. His aggressive foreign policy aimed to overturn the post-World War I order and establish German hegemony. He dreamed of Lebensraum, living space in the East for the German people. This concept was central to Nazi ideology, justifying the conquest and colonization of Eastern Europe. Hitler's vision included the displacement and extermination of millions to make way for German settlers. He began to flex his military muscle, first by remilitarizing the Rhineland, a direct challenge to the Treaty of Versailles. This bold move in 1936 was met with little resistance from France and Britain, emboldening Hitler and demonstrating the weakness of the Western democracies. Emboldened by the lack of a strong response from the Western powers, Hitler grew bolder. He realized that his adversaries were reluctant to confront him, preferring diplomacy and appeasement over conflict. This perception of weakness only fueled his ambitions further. In 1938, Hitler annexed Austria, his birthplace, into the Third Reich. The Anschluss was achieved without a single shot fired, as Austrian Nazis facilitated the takeover and many Austrians welcomed the unification. This bloodless coup was a significant propaganda victory for Hitler. The Anschluss, met with little resistance, signaled his growing appetite for conquest. It demonstrated the effectiveness of his strategy of intimidation and propaganda, and it further isolated those who opposed him within Germany and abroad. Czechoslovakia was next on the list. The Sudetenland, with its significant German-speaking population, became the focal point of Hitler's demands. He claimed to be protecting ethnic Germans, but his true aim was the destruction of Czechoslovakia. The Sudetenland, a region with a significant German population, was annexed after the Munich Agreement, a desperate attempt by Britain and France to appease Hitler and avoid war. The agreement, signed in 1938, allowed Hitler to occupy the Sudetenland without military intervention, a decision that would soon be regretted. Appeasement, however, only emboldened the dictator. Hitler saw the Munich Agreement as a sign of weakness and continued to push his expansionist agenda. The Western powers' reluctance to confront him only made him more audacious in his plans. On September 1, 1939, German forces stormed into Poland. The invasion was swift and brutal, utilizing the blitzkrieg tactic of rapid, overwhelming force. This marked the beginning of World War II as Britain and France declared war on Germany in response. The invasion marked the beginning of World War II, a conflict that would engulf the globe and leave an unimaginable scar on humanity. The war would see unprecedented destruction, the Holocaust, and a reshaping of the world order, the consequences of which are still felt today. Hitler, having conquered much of Western Europe, turned his sights eastward. His ambitions were not just limited to territorial expansion, but also to the ideological conquest of what he considered the heart of Bolshevism. The Soviet Union, with its vast resources and immense landmass, represented both a threat and an opportunity for the Nazi regime. Hitler's vision of Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people was intrinsically tied to the conquest of the East. The vast expanse of the Soviet Union, with its resources and land, beckoned. The fertile plains of Ukraine, the oil fields of the Caucasus, and the industrial heartlands were all seen as vital to sustaining the German war effort. The sheer size of the Soviet Union, however, posed a logistical challenge that the German High Command would soon come to realize. On June 22, 1941, in violation of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. This surprise attack was meticulously planned, involving over 3 million Axis troops, thousands of tanks and aircraft. The initial phase aimed to encircle and destroy Soviet forces in the western part of the country, paving the way for a rapid advance towards key objectives. It was the largest military operation in human history. The scale and scope of the invasion were unprecedented, with 3 major army groups advancing along a front that stretched from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. The German strategy relied on speed and surprise, aiming to deliver a knockout blow before the Soviets could effectively mobilize their vast reserves. The initial German advance was swift and brutal. Utilizing blitzkrieg tactics, the Wehrmacht quickly overran Soviet border defenses, capturing vast swaths of territory. Towns and cities fell in rapid succession, and the Luftwaffe dominated the skies, crippling Soviet air defenses and supply lines. The Wehrmacht, battle-hardened and confident, smashed through Soviet lines. The Red Army, despite its numerical superiority, was caught off guard. The purges of the 1930s had decimated its officer corps, leaving it ill-prepared to face the German onslaught. Soviet units were often encircled and destroyed, leading to massive losses in men and materiel. The Red Army, caught off guard and hampered by Stalin's purges, reeled under the onslaught. Stalin's initial refusal to believe that Hitler would break the non-aggression pact further delayed the Soviet response. As a result, entire Soviet armies were encircled and annihilated in the early weeks of the campaign. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured or killed in the first months of the campaign. The German advance created vast pockets of encircled Soviet troops, leading to some of the largest surrenders in military history. The brutality of the conflict was evident, with both sides suffering immense casualties. Cities fell one after another. Key industrial centers and transportation hubs were captured, disrupting Soviet production and logistics. The German forces seemed unstoppable, their momentum carrying them ever deeper into Soviet territory. The road to Moscow, the Soviet capital, lay open. The fall of Moscow was expected to deal a crippling blow to Soviet morale and command structure. German High Command believed that capturing the city would force the Soviet government to capitulate. However, the Germans had underestimated the vast distances, the harsh Russian winter, and the tenacity of the Soviet people. The logistical challenges of supplying an army over such a vast front became increasingly apparent. The onset of winter brought with it freezing temperatures and snow, conditions for which the German army was ill-prepared. As the campaign dragged on, the German advance slowed. The harsh winter conditions took a severe toll on the German troops, who lacked adequate winter clothing and supplies. Tanks and vehicles became bogged down in the snow and mud, and the soldiers faced frostbite and exhaustion. The Red Army, bolstered by fresh reserves and fueled by patriotic fervor, began to offer stiffer resistance. Soviet propaganda played a crucial role in rallying the population to the defense of the motherland. Reinforcements from the eastern parts of the Soviet Union, far from the front lines, were brought in to bolster the defenses. The Germans, ill-prepared for the brutal winter, suffered from frostbite and dwindling supplies. The extended supply lines were vulnerable to Soviet attacks, and the harsh weather conditions made resupply efforts increasingly difficult. The morale of the German troops began to wane as the reality of a prolonged conflict set in. The Battle of Moscow marked a turning point. Despite initial successes, the German advance was halted just miles from the Kremlin. The Soviet defense, bolstered by fresh troops and fortified positions, proved too strong for the exhausted and freezing German soldiers. The German offensive stalled just miles from the Kremlin, exhausted and frozen. The failure to capture Moscow dealt a significant blow to German morale and marked the beginning of a protracted and grueling conflict on the Eastern Front. The Red Army launched a fierce counter-offensive, driving the invaders back. The Soviet winter counter-offensive, beginning in December 1941, pushed the German forces back from the gates of Moscow. This marked the first major defeat for the Wehrmacht in the war. The myth of German invincibility was shattered. The successful Soviet defense and counterattack demonstrated that the Red Army was capable of not only withstanding the German onslaught, but also of launching effective offensives of its own. The war on the Eastern Front had become a war of attrition, a grinding struggle for survival. Both sides suffered immense casualties, and the conflict would drag on for years, with neither side able to secure a decisive victory. The Eastern Front would become the deadliest theater of World War II, shaping the course of the conflict and the fate of millions.